Hello, BookTube. I'm Jonathan, and here on BookTube, we like to get a little pretentious from time to time, analyzing themes and prose. Not today. Today, we are going to be focusing on 10 books, the most sword-swingiest, ray-gun blastiest books we could think of, and in order to do that, I have recruited Dan from Treebeard Book Reviews. Dan, are you a fan of action in your books? Are you an action lover?
Oh man, I sure am. A lot of the books I try to read in the fantasy genre, or even in sci-fi, are highly action-packed, and it may not be swords and shields, but there might be tooth and claw in there as well. So it is definitely one of the favorite subgenres of fantasy that I like to read. So I want to say thank you again, Jonathan, for having me on and to bring 5 books, fantasy books that are action-packed.
Awesome. So I love action. In sci-fi, you've got cool technology. In fantasy, you've got cool magic and stuff. So I've recruited Dan to recommend you 5 fantasy books. I'm going to be recommending you 5 sci-fi books. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to be spinning the quantum wheel to find out my patron pick for April. So I've been talking for a little while. Dan, I'll let you start. What is your first action-packed fantasy recommendation?
Yeah, so this was a fun list. So I kind of tackled my list in a different way. So I looked at the kind of action heroic fantasy genres, and I broke it down into kind of some little subgenres of heroic fantasy, urban fantasy, grimdark, YA, and some epic fantasy. So the first one I'm going to be coming at you with it's a YA. It's a coming of age story, and it is dragon fantasy. And it is the Dragon Champion by E.E. Knight. It's the first book in the Age of Fire. So I'm going to get this in screen here a little bit better, Jonathan. Sorry about that.
Dragon
All right,
Champion.
so yeah, Dragon Champion. So I will give you a little synopsis here. So rather than you being in the POV of a human character, you are in the head of Auron, who is a young dragon. He is hatched right out of his egg.
Ooh.
And it gets straight into the action where he is fighting his broodmates. And this whole book is you're in the head of Auron, a young dragon, and he is growing up. And you find out he's one of the last dragons alive. And he's competing in this world that is, everyone is really out to kill him. Dwarves and humans. And, even from a young age, he's fighting tooth and nail. It is a YA series. There's 6 books in this series. And it's such a fun read, such a quick read. It doesn't even hit 400 pages, and it's a lot of fun.
I like it. I mostly read sci-fi. I haven't read that much fantasy, but I do like fantasy films and TV shows. Dragons, usually the highlight of any fantasy show or film, and getting to read from the dragon's perspective. That's very interesting. That's intriguing.
What really kind of hooked me on this book, where I'm not in the head of a human, I'm in the head of a dragon, and dragons think really differently to humans, and I think E.E. Knight really captured it in this book. I said take it for what it is. It's a YA novel, but it is a lot of fun.
Nice. That's a mark of a great sci-fi author, is being able to write aliens that feel truly alien. This is not just a human with blue makeup and pointy ears. This is a real alien. So I'm interested to see whether they can write a dragon that feels different from humans.
Yeah, well, hopefully everyone gives it a shot.
All right. For my first action-packed sci-fi recommendation, I'm going to go with Old Man's War by John Scalzi. So this is a modern sci-fi novel which is a little bit similar to The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, although John Scalzi says he hadn't read it. He said he read it only after he had released Old Man's War, and everyone said, hey, that kind of reminded me of The Forever War. But it feels more modern. It's a little bit more faster paced. It's a little bit more satirical. It's comedic, but it has those sci-fi concepts to do with time dilation, military battles in space against aliens and things like that. And the hook is that everyone in this space military is a senior citizen. So how the military recruits people for their army is that they say, okay, you've lived a long life, and that's great, because you've actually filled your brain with knowledge, expertise, wisdom. If you join the army and join this fight against the aliens in space, we'll give you a new body. And so we'll be able to have old brains in fresh, strong military bodies. And so that kind of juxtaposition leads to some interesting characters, some funny moments, and some great space battles.
That sounds pretty interesting. I do have that book. It's on my long TBR for sure. I have heard about it, and it's something I'm definitely interested in reading. I didn't know that. Yeah, they get put into younger bodies. That sounds pretty cool. I wish. I know I'm a aging booktuber myself, and might need that one day. So I might in the future have to sign up for some space battles myself.
Yes, if you like crotchety old man humor, it could hit for you.
Well, that's really in alignment with Terry Pratchett, who is my favorite author, and he was a crotchety old man. So I think it'd be right up my alley. That's a great recommendation, John.
Awesome. All right, Dan, what's your second pick?
All right, so my second pick, I kind of went down the grim dark on this one. So this book, it is the second book in the Five Warrior Angels. So the series is the Five Warrior Angels by Brian Lee Durfee. The second book is called The Blackest Heart. This book is all gas and no brakes. And to kind of pitch this series here, where it's 1,000 years since the death of the god Lejean and his five warrior angels. Lejean himself was a five warrior angel, and they're waiting for his rebirth after 1,000 years, and the angels' rebirth. And so you're met with these protagonists of Nail and Jonderlin, and they're maybe prophesized to be the rebirth, the reborn five warrior angels. So it's a great grim dark fantasy. It is grim dark. It's pretty brutal, pretty bloody, especially in the second book. Is one of the best battle sequences I have ever read. And it, like I said, all gas, no brakes. It does not stop from page 1 till page 1,000. It's a big book, but it is well worth the journey. I have finished the series now, and it's just, there's so much action there. But again, you do have to like a bit of the grim dark and some gory details. But if you like action, you like artifacts, weapon artifacts, different takes on religion, this is the book series for you.
I love it. So I haven't read this series, but I have watched Brian Lee Durfee on YouTube, and he's an absolute riot. So go subscribe to his channel. He's very entertaining. And while he's a little bit wacky on camera, apparently everything I've read about his books is that they're quite serious, they're quite heavy, deal with some heavy themes, as you mentioned, religion and battles, and it's a very deep and well thought out world. And so that's great to hear that the action is great too. I am focusing on sci-fi for now, but in the future, if I get a taste for some fantasy, Brian Lee Durfee, I think he's definitely going to make the short list.
It's definitely well worth the read, and like I said, it's a big book, but they're all big books. Let's be serious. And I definitely enjoyed my time, and it was not wasted time. That's for sure.
Okay, awesome. Well, for my second pick, I have gone with one that you're probably familiar with, one that I'm a fan of, and Dan is not. That is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. So, Red Rising, if you don't know, is set in the future. We have humans that are terraforming, colonizing Mars, and we have a caste system that is split into colors. And so our main character, Darrow, he is a lowly red, and he tries to infiltrate his way into something called the Institute, which is kind of like a battle school for the young elites of society that are part of the gold caste. And so we have what sounds a little bit Hunger Games-esque start to the series, and I did like that. I liked it from the jump. I liked the first book. I liked that it was very character driven. I liked that we had these games which felt like a game, but then the stakes got very real very quickly. But then the series does kind of grow into something that is a grander space opera. By book 2 and book 3, the action kind of go from these like small squabbles to big battles. It's like the scale gets much bigger. The sci-fi concepts get much more interesting. And so this is a series that, if it clicks for you, and I understand with the first person and different, reading subjective. So if you don't like it, that's okay. If you like it though, I think you're going to burn through it because it's got a ton of action and the pacing, I think, is lightning fast.
No,
Dan,
thanks for kind of explaining that a little bit more. Yeah, no, I have a mixed feelings with Red Rising. I understand that when I read that book, I wasn't in the right headspace to read it. I'd come off reading another sci-fi series that I really, really enjoyed, and to read Red Rising just didn't live up to that expectation for me. But the funny thing is, I have Golden Sun on my TBR this month, so I'm ready to kind of dive back in, give it another shot.
Ooh.
I think I'm gonna be less biased now. I've read a lot of comments and a lot of things said about this series, and I'm ready for my mind to be changed. So I'm glad you kind of brought it up, Jonathan, to spark me
We're gonna
my
have to
interest in
follow
reading it. Yeah, we'll have to. I'll have to do a check-in, I think, with Golden Sun.
We'll be checking in. Yeah, I think if the first book just doesn't work for you at all, that's okay. I think if you're mixed on the first book, though, I'd say give book two a chance, because it does change quite a bit from book 1 to book 2, and then after book 2, I think you've kind of got a sense of whether the series might not be for you. So
that's what I've
let us
heard,
know in the comments, and we'll have to check back in with Dan
Yeah,
and see his reaction.
that's
to
what I've
Golden
heard, and I'm ready to give it another chance. So I'm glad we brought up Red Rising.
Sun. All right, Dan, what is your third fantasy pick?
All right, so number 3, I really went with an epic fantasy, and this is one of my favorite series of all time. It is really it's a trilogy. It's action from beginning to end. It's a really strong female protagonist. Everyone's probably going to know this series very well, but I just think it's well worth mentioning, and that is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. The first book is actually supposed to be called the Broken Empire, or the First Empire, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but it's now really just kind of renamed Mistborn. But this is a different kind of action novel, because it is Brandon Sanderson at his best, writing magic systems. But it's really actually a heist book in the beginning, where it's heist with metal magic and My Fair Lady. So it's it's a real interesting story. But Brandon Sanderson does a great job. He's very cinematic when he writes his action. He really explains everything that's happening, and he gives you a very vivid visual sense of how the action is taking place, and especially with the magic system that's in Mistborn, there's actually several different magic systems, but the metal magic system really makes sense, really plays out cinematically. And I think if you are a very visual reader, you picture a lot of your books in your own mind while you're reading, this book will do it for you. And the action is great, and the action only ramps up in the subsequent sequels in the series. So Mistborn, everyone knows it, everyone has recommended it until they're blue in the face, but I love it, and it'd be a miss to not be on this list.
You'd be a mist. Born out of that pun, we continue with the conversation. Dan, do you think Mistborn is a good entry point for Sanderson? I have not read any Sanderson. I'm kind of interested in Skyward because it is sci-fi, although it's YA. But I've heard good things about that, and Mistborn is another one that
Brandon
seems...
Sanderson, he's one of the authors where he has a lot of good jumping in points. He's kind of like
Smart.
almost a little bit
Good
like Harry.
businessman.
What's that? Yeah, he's a marketing master, let's say. There are several books that I think I could safely recommend as a jumping in point for Brandon. Skyward, again, is another one. I have read Skyward. Again, not my favorite, but it's a great jumping in point. Mistborn, Tress of the Emerald Sea is one of his secret novels that just came out. And even his new secret novel that just came out, which might appeal to you, Jonathan. It's the Wizard's Handbook to Surviving in Medieval England. And it's a wacky sci-fi novel, but yeah, I think Mistborn is probably, if you want to get a good sense of Brandon Sanderson, Mistborn is probably the best jumping in point, because when it gets into his bigger series like the Stormlight Archive, which is again another hard magic system, it's very familiar, and it's all part of an interconnected universe. So I would recommend Mistborn. It toes that line between YA into adult fantasy, but it's truly epic fantasy.
All right. You've sold me. On the short list it goes, Dan.
Yeah, there you go. On the long TBR.
Okay. For my third sci-fi pick, full disclosure, in these recommendation videos, I always recommend books that I enjoy. Every book I've ever recommended, given 4 stars or 5 stars. This book I gave 3 stars, okay? This book I'm bringing out Sure, purely because Dan made me read this book. I think it is action-packed, even though I didn't personally love it. I want to discuss it with Dan, and that is Horus Rising by Dan Abnett. Is part of the Warhammer 40k series, or the Horus Heresy sub-series. So I didn't know anything about Warhammer 40k before going into this. This is my introduction to the series. I knew of the game, but had never played the game. We spun the wheel for last month's patron pick of the month for me to read on the Quantum Wheel. Dan's pick. Dan has a good track record with these wheel spins. His pick, Horus Rising, came up. And there were some things that I liked about it. It was clearly a very deep world, a rich world. It's no surprise that there's like 60 books in this series and then more outside of this in the larger series. So a lot of thought and care has been put into the universe, how things work, the history. So it's very layered. There's a lot to dive into that I liked. I like that it's kind of uncovering some of those mysteries. And when we did get into action, it was full steam ahead. There was no holding back. It is quite violent. It's quite gory. It's messy. It is just a real hack 'em, slash 'em, blow 'em up kind of time. If that's the kind of thing you're looking for, then you might enjoy Horus Rising. My gripes with it were that some of the thematic explorations felt a little bit surface level to me, and I never really got invested in any of the characters. There was a lot of characters with kind of funky names that you fantasy readers might be used to. I kind of lost track of a lot of the secondary characters. The main characters I could just about keep up with. And there were one or two that I thought had interesting motivations, but for the most part, I didn't really get into the characters or the themes, and stylistically, it reminded me of some other series that I really like, such as Deathstalker, which could have been a good pick for this video, but I've talked about Deathstalker a lot recently. But Deathstalker has a sense of fun. It is kind of over the top, and there's this kind of gore and action and stuff, but it's very self-referential. It's very funny, whereas Warhammer is deadly serious. And I think if you're going to go that route, I don't think funny or serious is inherently good or bad. One's better than the other. It's just how you execute. I feel like if you go serious, you kind of need the emotional depth, the literary depth to back that up, and it just kind of lacked that punch for me. But it was still worth the reading. I gave it 3 stars. It was enjoyable. Well, Dan, what was your Horus
well, you know what they say, Jonathan. In the grim dark of the future, there's only war, and
yes. That's true.
So I might have a different experience just because I did the audiobook for Horus Rising, and it was narrated by Toby Longworth. And I will say he's an absolutely transformational kind of narrator.
Love it.
I think if I read this book, it would have been lower ranking for me. And I did the audio, and it was fantastic. He's got this beautiful British accent that really kind of pumps you up in a lot of the moments. But I think, yeah, this is, for what it is, which is an IP novel set in the Warhammer 40k universe. I think it really delivered. It knows exactly what it is. It's violent, it's gory, and it kind of gives you the things you want. And if you're even a Warhammer fan, like I've played the tabletop game for several years now, and I haven't really read the books besides just what you get in the codexes to play your army. And diving in, I knew what a primer was, and I knew some of these terms, so it was a lot of fun. I knew what it was going in, so I think we definitely had colored experiences. But I will say, if you like audiobooks, this is a great audio pickup.
I love it. That's good to hear. So if you are interested in Warhammer 40k, or even if you don't know anything about Warhammer, but this book sounds interesting to you, maybe try the audiobook. So Dan, what is your 4th fantasy pick?
Yeah, so my 4th fantasy pick, this one was a fun one. It's a well-known series. It's with a famous wizard named Harry, and that is the Dresden Files with Harry Dresden. So, yeah, little bait and switch there. Sorry, Jonathan, but I want to talk about the Dresden Files. This is the first book, Stormfront. It's an urban fantasy, and Harry Dresden is a wizard for hire, and he's in Chicago. And he is really kind of a creature of the week, and it's really done just to kick the snot out of Harry Dresden. All the books ramp up The stakes are always high at the beginning of a Dresden novel, and then they just progressively get higher. Harry gets hurt. He's blowing stuff up with his staff, and maybe that's a little bit a little bit on the garish end. But yeah, they're really fun novels, exactly kind of like Horus Rising, and they know exactly what they are. They deliver on every single novel, and they're a bunch of fun. If you like magic, you like seeing magic done in an urban and in the streets of Chicago, and Harry himself is a very comedic figure. There are some very serious moments to this series, but I found with every Dresden novel, as soon as I pick it up, I cannot put it down. And I'm on book 8 now of a series that's spanning 17 or 18 books. It's going to continue even more, and even on to 21 books, I believe, or probably even more than that. But it's such a wonderful series. Harry has a lot of depth to him as a character. And it's like I said, if you like monsters, you like wizards blowing up stuff in the streets of Chicago, the series and book is for you.
Awesome. Well, I have not read the Dresden Files. My understanding or knowledge of the Dresden Files mostly comes from those book trailers. Do you remember they made a couple of book trailers? I think it might have been for the two most recent releases, like a year or two ago.
Peace Talks and Battleground. Yes.
A friend of mine an actor that I met on a project, he got cast as Harry. And so how I found out was someone on Discord shared this GIF of the Dresden character. I think he slams his staff down or something, because someone says are you really dumb enough to do that? And he says, I'm more than dumb enough. And I was like, hey, I know that guy. So
Harry Dresden is great. I will say, for these novels, I have done the audio book for all of my Dresden File reads, and they are amazing. I will highly recommend the audiobook. Again, the performance by James Marsters is absolutely transformational. Makes the text a lot better. I've physically read one, which is Stormfront, the first one, and then I decided to switch to audio, and I've had a much better time with them. So again, maybe I'm swinging the audiobook hammer a little too hard here, but these ones are really worth getting on audio.
I like it. Well, thumbs up for the audio, thumbs up for the book trailers. Shout out Jason, shout out Harry Dresden. I've heard good things. Give it a try. Okay, Dan, I've kind of drawn some lines in the sand between us. I picked series I like, you don't. You like, I don't. I think we can agree on this one. This pick will bring us together. For my fourth action-packed sci-fi recommendation, I have gone with the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio. So this is kind of a sci-fantasy series. Has a little bit of a fantasy in space type feel to it. But it starts off with Hadrian, the narrator of the story, telling us that he goes on to destroy a sun, killing billions, and he is viewed as a hero by some and a monster by others. And so we must go on this journey with him as he tells us his life story, how he got to that point, for us to make that decision for ourselves. And it's such a wonderfully written series. The prose is fantastic. The characters are great. Got cool sci-fi concepts, interesting themes. And something that I particularly love about this series is the action. Because we have kind of very intimate fight scenes. It might be a one-on-one duel where we're feeling every bead of sweat dropping from the forehead, every gasp as the knife punctures the shoulder. I'm not a writer. Chris, read the book. Rocchio does a better job than me. All the way up to just absolutely epic scale battles. Like the scale is covered from end to end. I think Rocchio describes them beautifully. And look, there's some gladiator type scenes in like a kind of futuristic coliseum. Just want to preface this by saying I'm no gladiator. Okay. If I was in any of these coliseums, I would die instantly, okay?
Painfully, yeah.
But I have done martial arts for a long time. I've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for over 10 years. So I'm not saying I could fight in a coliseum, but I at least have an understanding of grappling, how grappling works to an extent. And so often when I read books where there's fighting, there's wrestling, things will either ring true or they don't. You quite quickly, you'll say, oh, this writer did their research, or they actually have martial arts experience themselves. And in Sun Eater, it really does ring true. I asked Christopher, how did you do such a good job with these fight scenes? And he said that he did a little bit of boxing, he did a little bit of fencing, and he really prepared. He really did the research to deliver us some amazing fight scenes.
Well, Christopher also is a classicist. I think he did a minor in classical history. And so he definitely studied the Romans and the gladiator games. It's actually kind of why I have that Rudis right there on my shelf, is because my bachelor's degree was in ancient civilization and ancient civilization in Greek and Latin language. And so I do have a background in looking at the Roman games and gladiatorial arena fights, and very to form with Christopher Rocchio. He is, again, a master and probably my favorite living author, actually.
Well, there you go.
So great pick, Jonathan.
Thank
5
you.
stars.
without any spoilers, do you have a particular battle or scene that comes to mind for any Sun Eater fans out there?
Yeah, but the battle, there's a particularly one-on-one battle that happens in the Demon in White, right near the middle of the book. I think I'm thinking of the
same one, yeah.
That is one of the only few moments in reading a novel where I've like stood up and cheered and like shouted like, "Oh my god!" Yeah. It's definitely one of the high points of the series, and one of the things I will fondly remember and cannot wait to get to on a reread.
Yes, for anyone that enjoys books on YouTube, booktube as we like to call it, you might be familiar with these sort of exaggerated thumbnail expressions. That book, that moment, this series elicits thumbnail level reactions from me that I swear are genuine. It doesn't matter. I could be reading this in public. I could be reading this book on a plane. You can lock in at least 3 moments per Sun Eater book that will make you go absolutely bonkers. All right, so we both loved that one, Dan. I'm sure I'll love your 5th and final recommendation as well.
Yeah, so this one I went full heroic fantasy, and it's a series I love. I don't actually have a physical copy because it's really hard to thrift. Nobody gets rid of these books because he's such a well-loved author, and I like to thrift a lot of my books. Nice. So I'm actually going to name the series, but I will name the book that is my favorite in the series. So the series is The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, and the book is Ruin. So again, this is set in a full fantasy world created by Mr. Gwynne. It's a coming-of-age story where you're with these young protagonists, and they're in a world that has been abandoned by their god. And the angels and the demons are at war in this spiritual realm, and they're trying to break through to the human realm. And we have this one character, Corbin. Is he the chosen one, or is he not? You don't know, and you're following on his adventure. But this story really evolves throughout the series. John Gwynne, he is a master at writing action and combat. He does reenactments himself of Viking battles, so he knows combat very well. He knows what he's talking about. And there's some characters in these novels, especially in the later novels, like Ruin, which I mentioned is my favorite. There's a certain character who I love who becomes a gladiator and has some of the most breathtaking, jaw-dropping fight moments that, again, all gas, no breaks. It makes you cringe with the amount of wounds that are being dealt. But it always kind of brings it back to center, and it's not just about the action. It is about the story end of the time. But if you like heroic fantasy, you like heroes going up against villains, you like good versus evil, you will like The Faithful and the Fallen. There is also a sequel series called Of Blood and Bone. It's a trilogy, which is a continuation set a few hundred years later. And again, John Gwynne is on form and well worth the read. So I love this series. Highly recommend it. And it's one of those I can't wait to reread as well.
I love it. When I gave you the topic for this video, as a fan of you and your channel, I was trying to guess what you might pick, and this was near the top of my list. I know Dan's a big fan of this series. I hear a lot of love for this series, and yeah, the action. If you love some sword swinging, wield, shield clashing stuff, yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Everyone loves Papa Gwyn. He's the man with the beard and the bald head, and he's just a scary Viking man, and he can write one heck of an action sequence.
I love it. Okay, well that brings us to my 5th and final sci-fi pick. And sometimes in these recommendation videos, I'll get some comments that say, Jonathan, you love Hyperion. you recommend Hyperion a lot. It doesn't matter the video topic. I'm like, well, that's because Hyperion it can cross so many boundaries, so many genres. It's applicable to so many video topics. But I'm not going to recommend Hyperion today. Instead, I'm going to recommend Endymion by Dan Simmons. There we go. We're not recommending Hyperion. Endymion is book 3 of the Hyperion Cantos, or book 1 of the Endymion duology. So, in case you don't know, Hyperion Cantos has 4 books: Hyperion, The Fall of Hyperion, and then Endymion and The Rise of Endymion. So, Endymion, it is a somewhat connected but also somewhat new storyline, and I think of the 4 books, Endymion is probably the most action-packed and has the fastest pacing. I think the sequels in general are a little bit underrated. Read all of them. But anyway, start with Hyperion, keep going. At least give Endymion a chance, because Endymion is a world-hopping adventure. We kind of get this little crew together, we have people chasing them, and we use kind of fun methods of teleportation to visit a whole bunch of different planets. So the setting's always changing, we got a fun character dynamic, and then there's some really cool action. I would actually say this book has my favorite fight scene in all of science fiction. I don't want to spoil it, but it involves some kind of cool technology, some characters with some interesting abilities to do with things like quantum mechanics, and the way Dan Simmons writes this fight scene, just the stakes feel so high, the speed feels beyond comprehension, it's like superhuman. It takes you to that place, that reading imagination that is really outside of your day-to-day experience. It just gets you excited to read, invested in these characters, and it was a scene that got my heart racing. If you do pick up Endymion, I hope you like it as much as I did.
That's a great plug, Jonathan, because I actually haven't read Endymion. I've read Hyperion and The Fall of Hyperion, and I really do need to get to Endymion, and I think you've sold me on this, so that sounds awesome.
Here's my advice, because the sequels are a little bit divisive. I feel like everybody should read Hyperion. If you like it,
I agree.
you want to complete the story arc, read The Fall of Hyperion. Personally, I absolutely love The Fall of Hyperion, but if it doesn't work for you, if you're like, no, I prefer the style of Hyperion, because there is a bit of a style shift, a structure shift, then you might not like the sequels, because the sequels do kind of get further away from what the original Hyperion was. But if you liked The Fall of Hyperion at all, I would at least try the Endymion duology, because I thought they were a lot of fun. The last book's a little bit more slow and philosophical, but Endymion, book 3, a lot of fun, a lot of action.
That's a solid recommendation. Like I read Hyperion. Actually, I was recommended listen to the audiobook. I do a lot of audiobooks, but this one Hyperion was specifically recommended because it is a full cast audio, and it's because it's told in that Canterbury Tales style, where each kind of story gets their own narrator essentially. So I loved the audiobook for Hyperion, and then The Fall of Hyperion really let me down because there was only one narrator. So I think with
don't blame the book for that, Dan.
No, I won't. And so I think Endymion, I'm just going to physically read. So that's a great recommendation, Jonathan.
I love it. Before we go, though, we are going to spin the quantum wheel. I'm going to pull up. What's it? Oh, Dan's holding up his pick. Dan has a great track record of winning these wheel spins. I'm going to pull it up now. All right, we got it set up. Welcome to the Quantum Wheel, where all of the patron picks are both simultaneously picked and not picked until we observe a winner. Let's find out what I'm going to be reading in the month of April. If Dan wins again, I'm going to lose my mind.
I'll slip you that $100, Jonathan.
Been accused of being rigged. Let's see. Talziro, Kesrith.
Oh, nice.
Kesrith. So there we go. Kesrith, I believe, was written by C.J. Chera. So that is an author I've wanted to try for a while. I believe she is more well known for her Foreigner series. Down Below Station is another one that I'm familiar with. But Kesrith, I'll be reading that in the month of April. If you sound interested, pick it up and join me, and I'll let you know what I think of C.J. Chera. So,
is that Chera spelled Cherryh?
There you go. This man knows his stuff. Spelling Bee, the BookTube Spelling Bee champion. I'm nominating you.
Someone's going to be marking off their bingo sheet.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Dan, thanks for joining us. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
everyone, go subscribe to Treebeard Book Reviews, read these books, and let us know in the comments what you think of them and what you enjoy for action-packed sci-fi and fantasy.